facing aggressive, cunning wild boars that constantly change their routes of invasion. Texas farmers understand that passive defense means certain defeat. These wild animals can turn thriving green cornfields into devastated wastelands in just a matter of hours. But Nick refuses to let that happen. Through sharp tactical thinking, the support of modern steel trapping systems, and a proactive strategy of stopping the threat before it reaches the fields, he has established no-entry zones right along the boundaries of his farm. The question is, how did this Texas farmer completely crush every attempt by wild boars to invade his farmland before they had the chance to cause destruction? The first key to breaking the wild boar's plans is building an effective trapping system. During the day, Nick installs a large cage trap at the corner of an open field. He carefully tightens every joint, reinforces each support post, and thoroughly tests the trigger mechanism to ensure it functions with complete reliability. At the same time, Nick moves to the edge of the farm, where a well-used game trail serves as one of the wild boar's regular travel routes. He positions another trap directly across the trail and spreads sweet corn as bait to draw them in. In another section bordering the cornfield, he carefully scatters more bait, creating a path that leads the animals deep into the trap. Attracted by the irresistible scent of the corn, groups of wild boars walk into the traps without suspicion, only to find themselves completely captured. As night falls, the infrared monitoring systems at the trapping locations begin their work. At the trap beside the game trail, a hungry group of wild boars crosses the boundary. Clang! The trap slams shut in the darkness of the night. At another steel cage trap positioned near the forest, a group of wild boars is busy feeding on the corn when the trap suddenly drops, startling the entire sounder as they panic and crash into the steel walls. The ninth string of successes concludes when the trap in the third section is also triggered automatically, locking another group of wild boars securely inside. Early the next morning, Nick starts his truck and begins collecting the captured animals. He drives to the first trap that was triggered during the night to transport the dangerous wild boar safely. He backs the truck into position and connects the transport cage mounted on the truck bed directly to the trap entrance. With a few confident guiding movements, he successfully transfers the entire group into the truck. Next, he checks the trap along the game trail, while the morning dew still covers the grass. As soon as the wild boars notice the hunter, they become extremely aggressive, repeatedly charging the steel cage. Recognizing the danger they pose, Nick shoots the trapped wild boars to ensure complete safety. The inspection continues at another trapping point along the farm boundary later that morning. Nick connects a steel loading chute from the trap directly to the truck bed, quickly transfers the captured wild boars onto the truck, and then drives them back home. Finally, at the third trapping location, Nick completes one last collection early that morning, successfully loading the remaining wild boars onto the truck and completely eliminating every sign of the night's intrusion. As the scorching Texas midday sun shines over green cornfields left untouched by rooting and destruction, the heavily loaded trucks, filled with the results of the operation, prepare to leave. Looking back at the sturdy steel cage traps standing firmly along the farm boundary, Nick lets out a quiet sigh of relief. The wild boar's plan to devastate the farm has been completely stopped, not through luck, but through proactive defense, careful preparation, and decisive action. Through this confrontation, Nick once again proves a simple truth. When people make good use of technology, remain persistent, and have the courage to protect the fruits of their labor, no wild animal can take away the peace of their land. Arizona, a harsh, arid land where water and farmland are both extremely limited. Yet somehow, wild boars have appeared here and are causing serious damage to the few usable areas that remain. Why are they choosing such a brutal environment? What are they searching for? And what makes them even harder to control compared to the places we dealt with before? That's exactly why I had to come here and start setting traps before the situation spiraled out of control. Today, I plan to place 4 traps at 4 different locations. I started with a homemade cage trap placed right beside an area filled with fresh rooting marks near one of the few remaining water sources. After securing the frame, I scattered bait around the outside and gradually led it deeper into the trap, creating what looked like a natural feeding path. Everything was finished before dark, and I pulled back to wait. As night fell, the wild boars finally appeared, following the scent of food and walking inside without suspicion. When we returned to check the trap, it had worked perfectly. Several wild boars were locked inside, reacting violently, but completely unable to escape. Next came another homemade trap, smaller in size, but reinforced much more heavily, placed in a wide open clearing near the forest edge. With very little cover around the area, everything had to look as natural as possible to avoid making the boar suspicious. After setting the trap and spreading bait early in the morning, we backed away and monitored from a distance. What surprised me most was how quickly it worked. By afternoon, the trap was already full. Not just 1 or 2 boars, but a surprisingly large number had been captured inside, packed tightly into the confined space, and creating a scene far beyond what I originally expected. Another trap set deep within a grove of casuarina trees had also been triggered. When we checked it, there was only a single wild boar inside, but it was a massive one, heavy-bodied and extremely aggressive. Even from a distance, it constantly paced inside the cage, desperately searching for a way out. But the moment we approached, it became even more violent, slamming directly into the metal frame again and again with tremendous force. The sharp crashing sound of metal echoed through the quiet forest, instantly creating a tense atmosphere. Even so, the trap held firm, keeping the boar completely contained. Finally came the trap placed deep inside the densest part of the forest, the area with the heaviest concentration of tracks, and the location I had the highest hopes for. Everything was carefully prepared before we left. leaving the trap alone overnight in the silence of the woods. As darkness covered the forest, the herd eventually appeared and entered the trap exactly as planned. By the following morning, we could already hear movement from inside before even getting close. The nearer we approached, the more agitated the boars became, thrashing wildly within the tight enclosure. It was immediately clear the trap had worked successfully, containing the entire group, just as I had hoped. After checking the traps, we began the difficult process of removing the wild boars. It was far from easy, as the animals constantly resisted and fought back. Every step had to be done carefully, with tight coordination to guide them out and load them onto the truck safely. It took a long time to fully control the situation, but eventually all of them were transported back to the collection point without incident. When everything was finally over, the area slowly returned to silence. Looking back across the land, I knew what we accomplished today was only a small part of a much larger battle. The wild boars may have been stopped for now, but the problem itself still remains, and I'll have to keep going. As the sun rises over the Texas countryside, I arrive at Nick's ranch. For weeks, he has been documenting growing signs that feral hogs are moving closer to the areas where his family lives and works. Rooted up fields, damaged fences, and newly formed game trails have convinced both of us to spend the entire day inspecting the monitoring sites that have been prepared in advance. Our first stop is the backyard behind the house. Nick has repeatedly found fresh tracks here and scattered bait the day before to help monitor the level of feral hog activity. When we arrive, the ground is still covered with numerous fresh footprints. It is clear that this remains one of their regular travel routes. I feel relieved that our earlier assumptions were correct, but at the same time, I cannot ignore the concern that the hogs have moved closer to the family's living area than ever before. Leaving the ranch, we head deeper into the forest where Nick says he has often seen groups of feral hogs moving at sunrise and sunset. The air beneath the trees is cool, but the ground has been torn up across a wide area. Layers of overlapping tracks reveal that a large group passed through during the night. Standing there, I understand why Nick often says that even a few days without monitoring can lead to significant damage to pastures and crops. The third survey site is only about 300 meters from the ranch. Such a short distance shows how blurred the boundary has become between farmland and the surrounding natural habitat. As I examine the area, it becomes clear that the feral hogs have been using the same travel corridor repeatedly over many days. This information is especially valuable because it helps Nick identify which sections of fencing need reinforcement and where future monitoring efforts should be concentrated. By early afternoon, we continue to another location near the edge of the forest. The signs here indicate that activity began quite early in the day. I spend considerable time recording the locations of game trails, travel directions, and the distance to the nearest water source. As we combine observations from multiple sites, the overall picture of the hogs' range becomes much clearer. That is exactly what makes today's survey far more valuable than simply examining each location on its own. The fifth site keeps my attention for quite a while. Tracks of many different sizes appear along the same trail, ranging from large adults to young piglets. This tells us that these are not solitary animals searching for food, but an entire sounder living and traveling together. Looking at the long stretches of rooted up ground, I understand why local landowners become increasingly concerned as feral hog populations grow. In a relatively short period, they could dramatically alter the condition of pastures and cultivated land. As the sun gradually disappears behind the oak trees, we return to the final monitoring site, located back on the ranch. Even after a long day in the field, we decide to complete one last inspection to finish collecting the day's data. The results show that feral hog activity near the residential area remains significant. Nick lets out a deep sigh and says that what he hopes for most is not to find more fresh tracks, but to see these travel routes become quieter over time. I completely understand how he feels. For a ranch manager, success is measured not by a single survey, but by whether long-term efforts to protect the land and crops continue to make a real difference. As the day comes to an end, we organize all of our notes, field photographs, and map travel routes. Every survey site adds another piece to the puzzle, helping us better understand how feral hogs use the landscape around the ranch. That knowledge provides an essential foundation for making informed management decisions aimed at reducing conflicts between agriculture and wildlife, while helping preserve the balance of the local ecosystem. After the last net trap setup, I realized something. This wild boar herd had changed. The net traps were no longer effective. They no longer moved in large groups like before, no longer rushed toward baited areas so easily. The tracks were still there, but more scattered, more sparse. And they always stopped just short of the places where I had previously set traps. And that made everything much harder. I needed a different approach. I needed a trap large enough to capture an entire herd quickly and efficiently. The first trap was set up during the day in a clearing deep inside the pine forest. Everything was carefully arranged, discreet enough not to raise suspicion among the boars. As night fell, they began to appear. One by one, they followed the scent of food into the enclosure. And once the entire herd had moved deep enough inside, the trap door suddenly slammed shut in the darkness. The next morning, when I returned to check it, the sounds and movement coming from inside told me the trap had worked exactly as planned. Two more traps were placed directly out in the open fields of the farm, a location that seemed far too obvious. I didn't expect much, since the area had almost no cover at all. But the result was the complete opposite. After just one night, the traps had captured far more wild boars than I anticipated. When I checked them, the scene inside genuinely shocked me. Clearly, the herd had let its guard down in a way I never expected. The fourth trap was placed right along the edge of the pine forest, an area the wild boars frequently passed through. When I came back to inspect it, several black-coated boars were already trapped inside. From a distance, they still moved cautiously, but the closer I got, the more panicked they became. The repeated crashes against the metal frame echoed non-stop, making the entire atmosphere feel more tense than ever. The final trap was placed deep within the dense pine forest, where sunlight barely reached the ground and where the wild boars often moved with little caution. We set the trap directly along an old trail. The signs were still clear. Every detail was adjusted carefully, from the position of the drop gate to the way the bait was scattered so it looked as natural as possible. Once everything was finished, we left, allowing the forest to fall silent again. As night came, the cameras began recording the first movements. Out of the darkness, the wild boars appeared. At first, only a few approached cautiously, moving slowly and constantly sniffing the air. Then gradually, the entire herd gathered inside the trap zone. And once all of them had moved deep enough inside, the gate suddenly slammed shut. The sound shattered the silence of the forest. Instantly, the herd erupted into panic. The boars in front turned around, only to find the exit blocked. The ones behind kept pushing forward, creating complete chaos inside the enclosure. Squeals, violent impacts, and the pounding of hooves crashing into one another echoed non-stop, shaking the entire trap violently. The next morning, when we returned, we could already hear the noise from a distance. And the closer we got, the more agitated the boars became, constantly moving, slamming into the frame, desperately searching for an escape that no longer existed. The tension filled the entire area. After finishing the inspection of all the traps, we began the harvest. Each trap was handled one by one, while the atmosphere remained tense as the wild boars continued reacting violently inside. Guiding them out and loading them onto the trucks was far from simple. It required tight coordination and careful calculation with every movement. From aggressive adults to tightly packed piglets, every animal had to be controlled and transported back to the collection point. And when the final truck finally drove away, I looked back across the trapping grounds and truly understood the scale of this operation. This wasn't just a hunt. It was an entire effort to control a wild boar population far larger than we had originally expected. When everything was finally over, the forest slowly returned to silence, as if nothing had ever happened. But I knew this was only one part of a much longer battle. What we accomplished today was necessary to keep everything under control before things spiral beyond limits once again. For many people, Texas is the land of freedom, endless cornfields, and sun-drenched highways. But for farmers like Nick, it is also a battlefield without gunfire. Every harvest is earned not only through sweat, but through an exhausting battle against invasive wild hogs. Like ghosts of the night, they arrive with razor-sharp tusks, tearing apart months of hard work and threatening the peace of the entire farm. Protecting the land, livestock, and crops is no longer just a job. It is an instinct for survival, an endless struggle between people and the untamed forces of nature. The fight against invasive wild hogs in Texas is never easy. Every new campaign begins with the most important step, preparing the bait. Nick carefully mixes a special attractant, a blend of whole corn fermented with sweet syrup and artificial scent, an irresistible combination capable of making even the wariest wild hog lower its guard. His patience is quickly rewarded. Returning the following morning, Nick hears loud squeals echoing in the distance before he even reaches the trap. An incredible sight awaits him. A large group of wild hogs have been successfully captured, crammed together inside the steel enclosure. As Nick approaches, the hogs become frantic, crashing violently against the wire panels. After dispatching them safely with a specialized firearm, he quickly loads the animals into the bed of his pickup truck. Encouraged by the successful start, Nick heads toward another trap positioned deep along the western forest edge. The hogs inside this trap are just as aggressive, slamming against the cage the moment they notice him. It turns into another highly productive morning as every captured hog is safely harvested and transported away. But trapping wild hogs is a game that humans do not always win. On the second day, luck seems to abandon Nick. As he walks toward one of his smart traps in an open pasture, he immediately notices that it has been triggered. The gate has dropped, but the cage is completely empty. After taking a closer look, he discovers a critical mechanical failure. The trigger latch became jammed halfway, leaving just enough of an opening for the panicked, intelligent hogs to squeeze through and escape. Swallowing his frustration, Nick carefully repairs the mechanism before resetting the trap, hoping to recover from the costly mistake. The disappointment does not end there. The next large corral trap, expected to capture an entire sounder, contains only a single hog. Considering the large amount of bait he had spread, the result is frustrating. Even so, Nick calmly follows a standard procedure. He assembles a portable transfer tunnel connecting the trap directly to the livestock trailer. The hog cautiously walks through the steel passageway, and the transfer is completed successfully. The third day brings situations far beyond anything Nick could have anticipated. Watching the live camera feed during the night, he anxiously follows the screen on his phone. A large sounder of wild hogs slowly moves into the central trap. The bait has worked perfectly, but at the exact moment the gate drops, another system failure occurs. The trap cannot withstand the pressure. The panicked hogs repeatedly slam into its weakest point, breaking free one after another and escaping within seconds while Nick can do nothing but watch in frustration. Before he has time to recover, Nick receives another trap alert from a nearby woodland. He immediately jumps into his truck and races toward the location, expecting another confrontation with aggressive wild hogs. But when his flashlight sweeps across the steel enclosure, he can only freeze for a moment before laughing in disbelief. Instead of wild hogs, the trap contains an entire family of wild deer staring back at him in confusion. With no hesitation, Nick quietly opens the gate and releases the unexpected visitors back into the forest. The patrol seems destined to end in complete disappointment until he returns to the very trap he repaired the previous day. Inside the cage, there's only a single captured hog. But Nick's disappointment instantly turns into complete astonishment. This is no ordinary wild hog. Its enormous size is almost breathtaking. With a massive shoulder shield, thick mane, razor-sharp tusks, and an incredibly muscular body, it is clearly a dominant old boar, the ruler of this stretch of wilderness. Capturing this giant is worth far more than catching 10 younger hogs. Removing such an experienced breeding boar means eliminating one of the greatest threats to the farm. As darkness settles over Texas, Nick securely locks the trailer and brings 3 unforgettable days of highs and lows to an end. The battle to protect his farm is far from over, but with determination, experience, and resilience, Nick is ready for whatever challenges come next. This time, I moved to another area in Arizona, a place where sparse forest blends with dry, barren ground, and wild boar tracks appear heavily concentrated around the few remaining water sources. Why are they gathering here in such large numbers? Was turning this place into a new hotspot? And are they beginning to adapt in ways that make ordinary traps less effective? Those warning signs were exactly what forced me to start trapping here immediately, before the situation became even harder to control. I decided to set a total of 5 traps, and the first one was placed in an open clearing deep in the woods, an area covered with fresh signs of wild boar activity. After finishing the setup and spreading bait, I left to continue placing the remaining traps in other locations. The work lasted for hours, but throughout the entire process, I couldn't stop thinking about that first trap, wondering whether it would actually work as planned. When I finally returned, I could already tell from quite a distance that something had happened. The silence that normally covered the area was now broken by loud, chaotic noises coming from the direction of the trap. And as I got closer, the sight in front of me genuinely caught me off guard. Inside the trap, an entire group of aggressive wild boars had been captured. They shoved against one another, moving wildly in panic. But no matter how violently they reacted, they still couldn't escape. The second trap had been placed right beside the forest edge. After checking the first trap, I could barely wait any longer and immediately headed toward the second location. The moment I got close, I realized something was wrong. The wire mesh surrounding the trap was shaking violently in the stillness of the forest. As I moved closer, the scene became clear. A pair of wild boars was trapped inside, thrashing around desperately while trying to escape. They slammed repeatedly into the fencing, spinning around inside the confined space and creating sharp, tense bursts of noise. But despite how aggressively they reacted, the trap continued to hold them firmly inside. That day had already been more than enough, so we decided to stop and leave the remaining traps unchecked until the following morning. As darkness fell, wild boars slowly began emerging from the woods, following the scent of bait into the traps through the silence of the night. When we returned the next morning, I almost froze at the sight in front of me. The number inside had increased dramatically. It was no longer just a handful of boars like before. Now there were dozens packed tightly together inside the confined space. They moved chaotically, creating relentless crashing sounds that made the atmosphere feel more intense than ever. Another trap showed clear signs that a large number of boars had entered during the night. The tracks and damage left inside proved that the original group had been much bigger. But when we checked the trap the next morning, the scene was completely different. Only 7 boars remained inside. It was obvious that most of them had escaped. The signs around the area showed that they had actually leaped over the fencing to break free, something I never expected them to do so easily. That alone proved these wild boars were not only numerous, but also incredibly strong and extremely reckless. The final trap turned out to be the biggest surprise of all. It had been placed in the middle of an exposed clearing, a location where I honestly didn't expect much because there was almost no natural cover around it. But when we checked it, the result was the complete opposite of what I anticipated. Inside was an entire herd of wild boars, both fully grown adults and smaller juveniles, crowded tightly together inside the trap. Clearly, they had let their guard down in a way I never expected, and that was exactly what turned this trap into one of the most successful locations of the entire operation. After finishing the inspection of every trap, I stood still for a moment and looked back across the vast area surrounding us. This time, the results went far beyond my expectations, not only because of the numbers, but because of how the wild boars were adapting and reacting. Some traps worked perfectly, but other situations revealed something far more concerning. The boars were becoming bolder, more unpredictable, and much harder to control. And that made me realize one thing clearly. Even though we achieved results today, this confrontation is far from over. At dawn, the first lights spread across the wide plains of Texas. Riding in our familiar Ford F-250 pickup truck, Nick and I set out for another busy day of work. Here in Texas, feral hogs are a true nightmare. They destroy hundreds of acres of corn, tear up pastures, and pose a direct threat to livestock water sources. Our mission today was to inspect the network of smart traps scattered throughout the ranch. Our first stop was a trap set along the edge of the woods, where the ranch meets the wild backcountry. Nick had installed this trap several days earlier. The moment we shut off the truck's engine, a chorus of harsh squeals and the clang of steel echoed through the trees. The first trap had captured an entire sounder of aggressive feral hogs. As I walked closer, the hogs caught our scent and immediately panicked. They slammed themselves against the heavy steel bars, their eyes blazing and tusks clacking, without hesitation. And to prevent them from damaging the trap, Nick and I quickly drew our rifles and dispatched them cleanly. We loaded the carcasses into the bed of the pickup and continued on our route. We drove toward the central fields. From a distance, a massive circular corral trap came into view. What amazed us was the unbelievable number of feral hogs packed inside. They were crowded shoulder to shoulder, climbing over one another in the confined space. With a catch this large, handling them one by one simply wasn't practical. We backed the pickup truck, already fitted with a large steel transport cage, up to the trap entrance. Nick then connected a portable wire mesh tunnel that linked the trap directly to the cage mounted on the truck. Once the trap gate was opened and the hogs were pressured from behind, they had only one way to go. They rushed through the tunnel one after another, running straight into the steel cage on the truck exactly as intended. It was a perfect combination of practical engineering and years of trapping experience. The truck continued toward an area of dense grassland where the vegetation stood waist high. The third trap brought another surprise. This time, it wasn't a mixed group of hogs. It was an entire feral hog family. Inside the trap was a pair of adult feral hogs. The boar's raised mane made it look especially intimidating, while numerous striped piglets crowded around them. As difficult as it was to see, Texas regulations are very clear. These invasive feral hogs reproduce at an astonishing rate, and releasing them would only cause further destruction to the ecosystem. Nick and I worked together smoothly, dispatched the entire group, and quickly collected the harvest. Since we were already in the area and the morning had fully broken, Nick decided to set a fifth trap along a game trail near a water source. We spread corn as bait, armed the automatic trigger mechanism, and moved on. To our surprise, when we returned later that afternoon to check it, the trap had already sprung. This time there were only 2 medium-sized feral hogs, but we were still pleased with the result. Every hog removed meant another piece of farmland protected. But the highlight of the day awaited us at the 4th trap, located deep inside the main ranch near the livestock feed storage area. As the truck rolled closer, both Nick and I were stunned. The trap was absolutely packed with feral hogs, the largest catch we had seen all season. Dozens of hogs of every size were crammed into the enclosure, squealing frantically as the overpowering stench filled the air. Looking at the scene, the excitement of a successful catch quickly turned into concern. The feral hog population in Texas was growing far too fast. They had become bold enough to wander right up to the doorsteps of local ranchers. We might have caught this many tonight, but how many more would arrive tomorrow? Nick tightened his grip on the steering wheel, fully aware that this battle was far from over. As the sun set, we headed to the western edge of the woods to set our 6th and final trap of the day before returning home for a short rest. When we came back later that night, darkness had completely covered the ranch. The headlights of the Ford F-250 cut through the night and illuminated the steel trap. Another sounder of feral hogs had been captured beneath the Texas moon. Wearing our headlamps, we carried out the familiar processing routine once again. Late that night, our Ford F-250, loaded with the day's harvest, rolled back into the garage. It had been a long, exhausting day, but an exceptionally successful one for both Nick and me. Although the invasion of feral hogs continues to grow more aggressive each year, Texas ranchers have no intention of backing down. With determination, smart trapping systems, and an unwavering spirit, they will continue doing everything they can to protect their land and the fruits of their hard work. More than $1 million worth of crops in Texas vanished within just a few months under the hooves of wild feral hogs. As the damage continued to grow, we decided to place all our hopes on a remotely controlled aerial drop trap system. Why had feral hogs become so densely concentrated here? What had made them even more cunning? And would these traps still be effective this time? That was why I had no choice but to begin setting traps today. The first trap was placed right along the edge of the forest, where signs of feral hog activity were clearly visible. After finishing, we moved on to continue setting the remaining traps. By the afternoon, when we returned to inspect it, I immediately realized that something had happened. The trap had been triggered, and inside, an enormous feral hog had been caught cleanly, massive in size and extremely aggressive. As we approached, it constantly moved and slammed violently against the trap frame, creating heavy crashing sounds that made the atmosphere more tense than ever. The second trap was also placed along the forest edge, only about 600 meters from the first location. When we checked it, a pair of feral hogs had already been captured inside. They move constantly within the confined space, reacting violently the moment they saw us approaching. But what caught my attention even more was this: a pair like this, under favorable conditions, could produce anywhere from 16 to 20 offspring within just a single year. That meant if they were not controlled in time, their numbers would rise incredibly fast. And catching them now meant eliminating a major threat before it could grow in the future. Next was a trap placed right beside the ranch area where we were staying, a location so familiar, even somewhat obvious, that at first I did not expect much from it. The trap was set during the day, and everything happened quickly, almost like a simple test to see whether the feral hogs were truly moving this close to the area. Once everything was finished, we left without thinking that anything significant would happen. But that evening, when we returned to inspect it, I nearly froze the moment I spotted the trap from a distance. The movements inside, the constant sounds of impacts, revealed that something far beyond our expectations had happened. And when we got closer, the sight in front of us genuinely shocked me. Inside the trap was such a large number of feral hogs that the entire enclosure was packed tight. They crowded together, moving chaotically and repeatedly crashing into the trap door within clear space. It was no longer just a few scattered animals. It was an entire group that had moved dangerously close to the ranch without us even realizing it. At that moment, I understood they had been much closer than we ever imagined. The next trap was placed deep inside the forest, in an area that had just been hit by heavy rain. Water had collected into muddy pools, and the ground had become slippery and difficult to move across. But those very conditions also made this place an ideal gathering point for feral hogs, a place with water and soft soil for rooting. After finishing the setup amid the damp surroundings and the heavy smell of wet earth, we left the area behind in silence. And judging by the signs around us, I was almost certain they would return. Exactly as expected, this trap became the one that delivered the biggest result. When we came back to inspect it, I could hardly believe my eyes. Inside were dozens of feral hogs packed together, from massive adults to smaller piglets crowded beneath them. The space, already narrow, had become completely overloaded. They moved frantically, continuously slamming into the metal frame and creating relentless crashing sounds. The scene in front of me not only showed how effective the trap had been, but also made me realize just how enormous the feral hog population in this area truly was. Finally came two smaller traps placed along the western edge of the forest. Although their size was modest and I did not initially expect much from them, the results still left me fairly satisfied. When we checked them, each trap had captured a pair of feral hogs. The space inside was tight, but still enough to hold them securely. And just like before, they reacted aggressively the moment they noticed people approaching. Looking at these results, I realized that even small traps, if placed in the right locations, could still be just as effective. After inspecting all the traps, we began gathering and transporting the feral hogs back to the collection point. The work was far from easy, as they continued reacting violently inside the confined spaces, forcing us to coordinate every movement carefully. Each trap was handled one by one, each animal loaded onto the trucks under constant tension but strict control. And as the final vehicle pulled away, I looked back at the area where the traps had been set and realized that this time we had accomplished far more than expected. But at the same time, it also reminded me that if we ever let our guard down, everything could quickly return to the way it was before. The battle against the invasive wild hogs in Texas is not fought only out on the open fields with rifles. It truly begins inside the farmer's workshop. As the wild hogs grow increasingly cunning and their population multiplies at an alarming rate, small homemade traps are no longer enough to stop them. To fully protect the fruits of his labor, Nick realizes he needs a larger, more professional campaign. That is why he decides to upgrade his entire arsenal, from high-tech smart traps to specialized transport equipment, turning a spontaneous hunting effort into a well-organized, efficient, and systematic operation. Realizing that his old homemade cage traps could no longer handle the growing problem, Nick makes a major investment. He orders a massive next-generation smart cage trap equipped with a remote-controlled automatic triggering system, which is delivered directly to his... However, even the biggest trap is useless without a suitable way to transport capture hogs. Nick begins an ambitious mechanical project, building a specialized wild hog transport trailer from an old trailer frame. For days, the sound of welding echoes through his workshop as sparks fly, while he carefully reinforces the steel frame and welds heavy-duty metal bars into place. The work demands tremendous patience, from welding load-bearing joints to designing a convenient drop gate that allows the hogs to enter the trailer but prevents them from breaking back out. After the final coats of rust-resistant paint are applied, the massive transport trailer is finally complete and ready to roll into the field. Fully equipped with his upgraded gear, Nick begins deploying traps across the hardest-hit areas. Every trap inspection now becomes a moment of anticipation. The first trap, positioned along the forest edge, successfully triggers and captures the first group of destructive intruders. Moving on to the neighboring valley, the second trap delivers another major success by blocking the path of another sounder of wild hogs. As expected, the third trap, placed in a dense grassland area, is also packed with captured hogs, proving just how effective Nick's upgraded trapping system has become. However, no matter how effective cage traps are, there are always a few old, experienced boars that refuse to enter them. To finish the campaign once and for all, Nick shoulders his rifle and teams up with his seasoned hunting dogs to track down the remaining animals. Under the scorching Texas sun, the dogs bark relentlessly as they corner their target. With a single precise shot, Nick brings down the last massive wild hog, completely eliminating the threat to his cornfields. The campaign ends not only with peace restored to the ranch, but also with a well-earned reward on the dinner table. Nick transports all the harvested wild hogs back to the processing area. With a sharp knife and practiced skill, he carefully butchers the animals, separating the finest, leanest cuts of meat, ready to be transformed into delicious meals for family and friends. Taking a refreshing sip of cold beer beside the smoky charcoal grill, Nick gazes across the cornfields that are finally safe once again. The greatest lesson from this campaign is that in the battle against nature, a farmer needs more than strength. Success requires investment, practical engineering, scientific thinking, and self-reliance. Turning a destructive pest into a valuable source of nutritious food is how Texas farmers adapt, survive, and assert their stewardship over the land they call home.